You know what it's like to live with a question that never goes away, right? The one they ask you at every family gathering, in every casual encounter, in every conversation that lasts more than 5 minutes. And you? When are you getting married? As if it were the only thing that defines your existence. As if there were an invisible timer marking your failure with every year that passes. But here's what nobody tells you. Maybe the failure isn't yours. Maybe the failure is theirs for keeping on asking the wrong question. Because there's something happening that nobody wants to admit. There's a generation of men who aren't getting married, and the world looks at them as if they were defective, as if something were missing, as if they were afraid. But what if I told you it's not fear? What if I told you it's exactly the opposite? What if what everyone calls cowardice is actually the smartest move there is? Wait, don't close this yet. Because what's coming is going to completely change your perspective. For decades, they sold us a formula. Grow up, work, get married, reproduce, like pieces on an assembly line. But something broke. And it wasn't the men who failed, it was the formula that stopped working. Because it turns out there's a brutal difference between marrying because it's time and marrying because you found something that's truly worth it. And more men are understanding that difference. More and more are raising the bar. It's no longer enough for someone to be kind or attractive. It's no longer enough for them to fit the social mold. Now they're looking for something more. An equal. Someone who is their match intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. Does that seem demanding to you? Well, welcome to the new game. Because these men understood something fundamental. Marriage is not an achievement, it's a gamble. A gigantic bet where you put your peace of mind, your emotional stability, your financial future, your freedom on the line. And like any big bet, it has to be worth it. There has to be something on the other side that justifies the risk. And here comes the uncomfortable part. For many, that something simply doesn't show up. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's extraordinarily rare. Think about this. We live in an era where everyone has access to everything. Infinite information, infinite options, infinite possibilities. And that changed the rules of the game completely. Because when you have access to everything, your standards go up. Inevitably. You no longer settle for the first thing that comes along, you wait for the best. And in the case of marriage, which is possibly the most important decision of your life, why shouldn't you wait for the best? Why should you settle for someone who's just okay when you know there's the possibility of finding someone exceptional? The answer the world will give you is, because you're running out of time, because life has deadlines, because if you wait too long, you'll end up alone. But that answer is rotten with fear. It's the voice of generations who had no options trying to convince you that you shouldn't have them either. It's pressure disguised as wisdom. And these men, the ones who stay single past 30, past 40, are saying, I'm not swallowing that lie. I'd rather be alone than poorly accompanied. I'd rather build my life my way than live the one they designed for me. And here's what's fascinating. It's not just an emotional matter. There's a brutal economic dimension that nobody wants to mention. Because it turns out these men did the math. They saw the divorce statistics. They studied the financial consequences. They understood that a failed marriage can destroy you financially for decades. And they decided that if they were going to take that step, it had to be from a position of strength. They had to be financially solid, emotionally prepared, absolutely sure, because they know the price of getting it wrong. And it isn't paranoia, it's realism. We live in a world where half of marriages end in divorce, where men, in most cases, come out financially devastated, where they lose custody of their children, half their assets, years of their lives paying debts from a relationship that no longer exists. And you call them cowards for wanting to avoid that? You call them immature for being cautious? No, my friend, that's not cowardice, that's intelligence. That's understanding that marriage isn't just love and flowers, it's a contract. A contract with legal, financial, emotional consequences that can haunt you for the rest of your life if it goes wrong. So what do? They wait, they build, they focus on their careers, on their projects, on their personal growth. They invest in themselves first, because they understood something the previous generation never taught them. You can't give from emptiness. You can't build a solid relationship if you yourself aren't solid. And in a world that changes at dizzying speed, where careers are no longer linear, where masculine identity is being constantly redefined, taking time to understand yourself isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Because here comes another factor nobody mentions. Male adulthood has stretched out. It's not like before, where at 25 you were already established, with a steady job, your own home, ready to start a family. Now 25 is barely the beginning. Personal exploration lasts longer. Building a career takes more time. The search for identity is more complex. And marriage, in that context, isn't seen as a natural step. It's seen as a door closing, as the end of exploration, as a renunciation of possibilities you haven't finished discovering. And you know what? They're right. Because traditional marriage, the one your parents, your grandparents knew, required clear roles. The man was the provider, the woman cared for the home. Simple, clear, unambiguous. But that model is dead. Or at least it's dying. And nobody has agreed on what replaces it. Now women are providers too. Now men are also expected to be emotionally available, to share household tasks, to be present fathers. And that's fine. It's good that it's that way. But nobody taught them how. Nobody updated the manual. So what happens? Many men feel that no matter what they do, it will always be wrong. If they provide a lot, they're distant. If they're emotional, they're weak. If they focus on their career, they're selfish. If they focus on family, they're not ambitious. It's a no-win game. And faced with that paralyzing ambiguity, many choose not to play. They choose to wait until they have clarity, until they feel completely prepared. And here's the problem. That moment may never come. Because total clarity doesn't exist. Absolute readiness is a myth. But they don't know that. Or maybe they do know it but prefer that to jumping in blind. They prefer the uncertainty of being alone to the certainty of being in something they don't fully understand. And the world judges them for it, calls them Peter Pan, eternal adolescents, men afraid of commitment. But it isn't fear of commitment. It's fear of committing to the wrong thing. It's fear of waking up at 40 in a marriage they never wanted, with children they barely know, living a life they never chose. That fear is legitimate. That fear is healthy. Because what nobody tells you is that there's something worse than being alone. There's something worse than never getting married. And it's getting married for the wrong reasons. It's entering a marriage out of pressure, out of fear, out of the need for social validation. Those marriages are time bombs. Everyone knows it. Everyone has seen them explode. And yet, they keep pushing people toward them. They keep selling the idea that getting married is better than being alone, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the quality of the relationship, regardless of whether it's truly what you want. And these men are saying no. They're saying they prefer to break the mold rather than squeeze into one that doesn't fit. They're saying their life has value without a partner, without children, without following the traditional path. And that, in a society obsessed with conformity, is revolutionary. It's terrifying to those who did follow the path. Because if you can be happy without doing what they did, what does that mean? That their sacrifices were unnecessary? That their choices were wrong? Not necessarily, but it makes them question themselves. And nobody likes to question themselves. That's why the pressure is so strong. That's why the questions are so insistent. That's why they look at you with pity when you say you're single. because your choice calls theirs into question. Your freedom reminds them of their cage. And although they won't admit it, although they disguise it as concern, what they really feel is discomfort. Discomfort in the face of someone who doesn't need what they needed. Discomfort in the face of someone who built meaning in a different way. But here's what's interesting. These men aren't rejecting marriage. They're not against the idea of sharing their life with someone. They're simply saying it has to be on their terms. It has to be with the right person, at the right time, with the right conditions. And if that never arrives, well, they've learned to be okay with that. They've learned to build a full life without the need for external validation, without the need to meet social expectations, without the need to follow a script that never belonged to them. And you know what's most ironic about all this? That by rejecting the pressure, by refusing to conform, by keeping their standards high, these men are probably creating better conditions for a successful marriage than those who married quickly and without thinking. Because when they finally find that person, when they take that step, they do it from strength, from clarity, from a genuine decision and not from desperation. And those foundations are much more solid than those built on fear and social pressure. But of course, the world doesn't see that. The world only sees the superficial outcome. A 35, 40, 45-year-old man without a stable partner, without children, living a life that doesn't fit the traditional mold, and automatically classifies him as a failure, as if there were only one way to live correctly, as if success were measured only in marriages and children, as if a human being's worth depended on their marital status. And that's the biggest trap of all, because we were taught to measure our lives with external metrics, with visible achievements, with social validation. And marriage, for centuries, was one of those primary metrics. If you were married, you were complete. If not, you were incomplete. But that equation is broken. It always was, because completeness doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. And there are married people who are empty, and single people who are fulfilled. Marital status determines nothing except your marital status. So why do we keep giving it so much power? Why do we keep judging people by that obsolete metric? Because it's easy, because it's visible, because it gives us a quick way to classify people without having to truly understand them. But life isn't that simple. Decisions aren't that binary. And what for one is success, for another can be a prison. These men understood that. They understood there isn't a single right way to live. They understood they can write their own script. And even if the world judges them, even if the questions never stop, even if the pressure is constant, they chose to live on their own terms. They chose authenticity over approval. They chose clarity over comfort. They chose to wait for something real instead of settling for something acceptable. And maybe, just maybe, that's the bravest choice of all. Because it's easy to go with the flow. It's easy to do what everyone expects. It's easy to get married because it's time, because it's about time, because all your friends already did. What's hard is to stop. What's hard is to say, this isn't for me, at least not now, at least not like this. What's hard is to endure the looks, the questions, the judgments, and keep going with your decision. Because at the end of the day, and this is what nobody wants to accept, your life is yours. Not your parents, not your friends, not society's, yours. And only you have to live with the consequences of your decisions. So why would you make one of the most important decisions of your life based on what others expect of you? Why would you sacrifice your peace of mind, your freedom, your authenticity, just to fit into a mold that probably doesn't even fit you? The answer is simple. You shouldn't. And more men are coming to that conclusion. More and more are choosing to live differently. And even if the world points at them, even if it calls them selfish, immature, cowardly, they know something others don't. That there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. That there's a difference between independence and isolation. That there's a difference between choosing your path and getting lost on someone else's. And that difference changes everything. Because when you understand that your worth doesn't depend on your marital status, when you realize that you can build a meaningful life without following the traditional manual, when you accept that it's okay to want something different, something more, something specific, you set yourself free. You free yourself from the pressure. You free yourself from judgment. You free yourself from that constant feeling that you're doing something wrong. Because you're not doing anything wrong. You're making conscious decisions. You're being honest with yourself. You're refusing to settle. And in a world that rewards mediocrity, that celebrates normality, that punishes difference, that's radical. That's brave. That is, ironically, much more mature than getting married just because it's what's expected of you. But of course, maturity isn't measured by meeting social expectations. It's measured by knowing yourself, by understanding what you want, by having the strength to pursue it even when everyone tells you you're wrong. And that's exactly what these men are doing. They're redefining what it means to be an adult. They're rejecting the idea that there is only one valid timeline. They're building lives that make sense to them, not to the outside observer. And yes, sometimes they doubt. Sometimes they wonder if they're making the right decision. Sometimes they feel the pressure, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of going against the current. Because it's not easy. It never was. Choosing your own path is never easy. But it's yours. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters, that it's yours, that it's authentic, that it's a conscious choice and not a surrender to pressure. Because life is too short to live it by someone else's script. It's too valuable to waste it in a marriage you never wanted. It's too important to settle for less than what you truly need. And these men, the ones the world calls failures, the ones it points at with an accusing finger, understood that before most. They understood that sometimes, not getting married is the smartest decision you can make. That sometimes, being alone is better than being with the wrong person. That sometimes, breaking the mold is the only way to find your true shape. And when the world finally understands it, when society stops measuring success with obsolete metrics, when we accept that there are 1,000 valid ways to live a full life, maybe then we'll stop asking those uncomfortable questions. Maybe then we'll stop pressuring. Maybe then we'll understand that each person has their own path, their own timing, their own truth, and that it's okay, that it was always okay, that there was never anything wrong with choosing differently. Because in the end, the only thing that really matters is this: are you living your life or the life others designed for you? Are you making decisions from your truth or from the fear of judgment? Are you building something authentic or simply meeting expectations? And if your answer to any of those questions makes you uncomfortable, if you feel that knot in your stomach telling you something isn't right, then you already know what to do. You already know you have to change something. You already know you deserve more than a life lived by inertia. And these men, the ones who remain single while the world judges them, already know it. They've already made that decision. They've already chosen their path. And even if it's lonely, even if it's hard, even if nobody else understands it, it's theirs, completely theirs. And that, in a world of copies and conformity, is worth more than any external approval. It's worth more than fitting in. It's worth more than being just another in the crowd. Because in the end, when you look back, what will matter won't be how much you pleased others, but how true you stayed to yourself. And that, my friend, is the only measure of success that really counts. And here comes something that's going to make you uncomfortable. Most of the people who pressure you to get married are deeply dissatisfied with their own lives. They'll never admit it. They'll disguise it as concern, as well-intentioned advice, as ancestral wisdom. But if you scratch the surface, if you watch closely, you'll see the truth. You'll see marriages sustained by inertia. You'll see couples who no longer talk, who share a house but not a life. You'll see people trapped in routines they hate, faking happiness in perfectly filtered photos. And those same people are the ones who tell you that you must get married. Doesn't that strike you as ironic? Doesn't it seem suspicious that those who insist the most are precisely the ones who least should be giving advice on the subject? Because there's a brutal psychological pattern in all this. When someone has invested years, decades even, in a decision they know deep down was wrong, they need to validate it. They need to convince themselves they did the right thing. And the easiest way to do that is by dragging others to the same place. If everyone is in the same boat, if everyone made the same decision, then it can't be that bad, right? It's a form of collective validation, a shared lie that becomes truth only by repetition. And you, by refusing to participate, by choosing differently, you break that illusion. You remind them there was another option. There always was. And that terrifies them. It makes them question themselves. It forces them to look at what they've built and ask themselves if it was worth it. That's why the hostility. That's why the insistence. That's why they call you selfish when in reality what you are is conscious. Because you saw what happened to them and decided you didn't want that for yourself. You saw dead on the inside marriages. You saw forced smiles at family dinners. You saw men destroyed financially after devastating divorces. You saw fathers who barely know their children because the legal system pushed them away. And you said, "No, thanks. I'd rather risk loneliness than guarantee misery." But there's more. There's a deeper layer that nobody wants to touch. These men aren't just waiting for the right person, they're waiting to be the right person. Because they understand something fundamental. You can't build a healthy relationship from a sick place. You can't give what you don't have. You can't be a good partner if you're still figuring out who you are. And in a world that pushes you to get married quickly, before you're ready, before you truly know yourself, this is revolutionary. This is saying, first I build myself, then I build with someone else. And yes, that takes time. That requires patience. That implies years, sometimes decades, of inner work, of therapy, of introspection, of mistakes and lessons learned, of building a career, of understanding your values, of defining your boundaries, of healing your wounds. Because we all carry wounds. We all come with baggage. And the question isn't whether you have it. The question is whether you're willing to work on it before imposing it on someone else. And these men are saying yes. They're choosing to do the work first. They're prioritizing their growth over the immediate gratification of not being alone. Because being accompanied is easy. You find someone who is also afraid of being alone, and you accompany each other in your mediocrity. You share fears, insecurities, emptiness. And you call that love. But it's not love. It's codependence. It's need disguised as romance. It's two incomplete people believing that together they'll make something complete, when in reality they only multiply their incompleteness. And the world is full of those marriages, of people who never worked on themselves expecting another person to fix them. And when that doesn't happen, when the other person turns out to be as broken as they are, everything collapses. So what do these men do differently? They break the cycle. They say, I'm not going to enter a relationship from a place of need. I'm not going to look for someone to complete me because I'm already complete. I'm not going to use marriage as an escape from my problems. I'm going to solve them first. And when I'm ready, when I'm the best version of myself, then I'll look for someone who has also done that work. Someone who doesn't need me to feel complete, but who chooses me because together we can build something extraordinary. And that is a completely different perspective. That's a completely different foundation. But it requires something most people don't have: courage. The courage to face yourself, to see your flaws without hiding them, to work on your traumas without projecting them onto others, to be alone without feeling empty. Because there lies the real test. Can you be with yourself? Can you spend days, weeks, months alone and be at peace? If you can't, if solitude terrifies you, if you constantly need to be with someone to feel valid, then you're not ready for a real relationship. You're ready for a dependence. You're ready to repeat the same toxic patterns you've seen your whole life. And these men refuse to do that. They refuse to be part of the statistics. They refuse to become another failed marriage. They refuse to bring children into a dysfunctional home. They refuse to fake happiness when they're dying inside. And that refusal, that resistance, is the healthiest thing they can do. Because breaking the cycle always starts with someone who says, "Enough. I'm not going to perpetuate this. I'm going to do things differently, even if it costs me, even if they judge me, even if I'm alone for years. I'll do it right, or I won't do it at all." And here is the biggest paradox of all. By moving away from traditional marriage, by rejecting the pressure to marry quickly and without thinking, these men probably have a better chance of having successful marriages than those who jumped in unprepared. Because when they finally do it, they do it from a place of strength, from self-knowledge, from clarity, not from desperation, not from the fear of being alone, not from social pressure. And those foundations are infinitely more solid. But no one sees that. No one acknowledges that maybe, just maybe, waiting is the smartest decision. That maybe taking years to get to know yourself is a better investment than jumping into a marriage you don't understand. That maybe being alone in your youth better prepares you to be accompanied in your maturity. But to recognize that would mean admitting that the traditional way of doing things isn't the only valid one. And that threatens the whole system. Because the system needs you to marry young. It needs you to have children quickly. It needs you to take on debts, to buy houses, to feed the economy with your need to support a family. The system doesn't function with independent men who can live with little, who don't need to impress anyone, who don't have mouths to feed other than their own. Those men are dangerous to the status quo. Those men aren't predictable consumers. Those men can't be controlled with the traditional levers of social pressure. And that's why they attack them. That's why they call them immature Peter Pan, men who never grow up. Because if they grow differently, if they reach maturity without following the marked path, then the marked path loses its power. Then others start to question themselves. Then the system starts to wobble. And they can't allow that. They need everyone to stay in line. They need everyone to fulfill their assigned role. They need the fear of being alone to be stronger than the desire to be well. But something changed. Something broke in that machinery of social control. And it's that this generation has access to information previous ones never had. They see the divorce statistics. They see the stories of men destroyed by devastating separations. They see the real costs, not just financial, but emotional, psychological, existential. And with that information, they make different decisions. Decisions that for previous generations would have been unthinkable, because before there was no choice. You got married because that's what you did. Period. There was no debate. There was no socially accepted alternative. Now there is. Now you can build a full life without getting married. You can have purpose, meaning, success, happiness, all without a marriage certificate. And that possibility changes everything. Because when marriage stops being mandatory, when it becomes optional, standards rise. You no longer get married because it's time. You get married because you truly want to. And you only want it if it's worth it. If the person you're going to marry truly adds something to your life. If together you can build something you couldn't build alone. And if you don't find that, Well, you've already learned to be okay alone. And that's the part that scares the system the most, that you've learned to be okay alone. Because when you're okay alone, you don't settle. You don't accept crumbs. You don't stay in mediocre relationships out of fear of not finding anything better. You have standards. You have boundaries. You have clarity about what you want and what you're not willing to tolerate. And that makes you incompatible with the average marriage, because the average marriage is built on compromise, on adjustments, on small daily deaths of who you really are to keep the peace. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. But you're no longer willing to die that way. You're no longer willing to sacrifice your essence for the illusion of stability. You're no longer willing to pretend, to adjust, to become someone you're not just to maintain a relationship. And without that willingness to self-sacrifice, traditional marriage doesn't work. It needs you to surrender a little. It needs you to yield. It needs you to prioritize harmony over authenticity. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're incompatible with the system. And that's okay, because the system is broken anyway. Look around you. Look at the marriages you know. How many are genuinely happy? How many are truly alive, growing, evolving together? Few. Very few. Most are on autopilot. They fulfill roles. They keep up appearances. But the spark died years ago. The passion evaporated. The connection diluted into routine. And now only habit remains. Inertia. The fear of starting over. And they call that commitment. They call that maturity. But it's not. It's surrender. It's accepting less than you deserve because they convinced you that less is all you can expect. And these men are saying, I won't settle for that. If I'm going to get married, it will be extraordinary or it won't be. Period. There's no middle ground. There's no acceptable marriage. Either it's exceptional or I prefer to be alone. And that stance, even if it sounds arrogant, even if it sounds unrealistic, is the only one that makes sense. Because what's the point of committing to someone if that commitment doesn't make you better? What's the point of marriage if it doesn't expand you, if it doesn't challenge you, if it doesn't take you to places you couldn't reach alone? None. Marriage for marriage's sake is empty. It's an institution without purpose. And once you understand that, once you see it clearly, you can't go back. You can't pretend you don't know it. You can't convince yourself it's okay to settle. You've already crossed that threshold of awareness. You already know too much. And with that knowledge comes the responsibility to act accordingly. Not to betray yourself. Not to enter something you know is wrong, just because it's easier than being alone. Because being alone isn't easy. It never has been. Human beings are social animals. We need connection, intimacy, belonging. But here's the secret. You can have all that without marriage. You can have deep friendships. You can have intimate connections. You can have a sense of community. Marriage isn't the only source of human connection. It's just one of many. And maybe, just maybe, it's not the best for everyone. Maybe some of us are designed for other kinds of connection. Maybe some of us need more space, more freedom, more flexibility than a traditional marriage allows. And that's okay. There isn't a single right way to be human. There isn't a single valid path to fulfillment. And even if the world tries to convince you otherwise, even if it insists that marriage is universal, that we should all want it, that something is wrong with you if you don't want it, the truth is more complex. The truth is that we are diverse. Our needs are different. Our paths are unique. And pretending we should all follow the same one denies that diversity. It reduces the human experience to a simplistic formula that doesn't work for everyone. These men know it. They feel it in their bones. They know the traditional path isn't for them, at least not on the terms in which it was presented. Maybe later, maybe under different conditions, maybe with the right person, but maybe never. And they've made peace with that possibility. They've stopped seeing marriage as an inevitable destination and reframed it as an option, one among many. And that mental freedom, that ability to choose without pressure, that is power. Real power. Not power over others, but power over your own life, over your decisions, over your future. And when you have that power, when you truly internalize it, the world changes. You no longer move from fear. You no longer make decisions to please others. You no longer live chasing approval. You live chasing authenticity. And authenticity, though lonely at first, though misunderstood, is the only path to true peace, to true fulfillment. Because when you're authentic, when you live from your truth, it doesn't matter what others say. It doesn't matter if they understand you or not. It doesn't matter if they approve or not, because you know. You have clarity, and that clarity is your compass. So yes, these men remain single, not because they're broken, not because they're afraid, not because they're incapable of love or commitment. They remain single because they're waiting for something real, something that's worth it, something that justifies the risk. And while they wait, they build, they grow, they evolve, they become the best version of themselves. And if that something never arrives, they'll be fine, because they learned the secret that most never discover, that being complete doesn't require another person. That fulfillment is an inside job, that you can be alone without feeling empty. And that knowledge, that inner peace, is more valuable than any marriage built on need and fear. So the next time you see a 40-year-old man who's single and your first instinct is to judge him, stop. Ask yourself what you really know about his life. Ask yourself whether your judgment is born of genuine concern or your own insecurity. Ask yourself whether maybe, just maybe, he knows something you don't. And instead of pressuring him, instead of pointing at him, respect him. Respect his choice. Respect his path. Because in the end, it's his life, not yours. And if he's at peace with his decisions, who are you to tell him he's wrong? The truth is you don't know. Nobody knows. Because success is subjective, happiness is personal, and what works for one may be a prison for another. So let everyone find their own path. And if that path doesn't include marriage, that's okay. It was always okay.